For most of human history, the North Sea has been seen as a hard border. On one side, Great Britain. On the other, mainland Europe. Cold water in between. But for thousands of years, that water did not exist. Where waves now move and ships pass, there was once land. Wide, low, and alive with people. That land is known today as Doggerland. The idea of Doggerland did not come from legends or old stories. It came slowly, piece by piece, from the sea itself. In the early 20th century, fishermen working the North Sea began pulling up strange objects in their nets. Along with fish and shells, there were bones. Not whale bones or seals, but the remains of animals that no longer lived in the region. Mammoth teeth, antlers from giant deer, even stone tools shaped by human hands. At first, these finds were treated as oddities, something curious to hang on a wall or show at a local pub. But as the years passed, the pattern became harder to ignore. The same kinds of tools and bones were appearing again and again across wide areas of the seafloor. They were not scattered randomly. They belonged to a world that had once been dry. By the mid-1900s, archaeologists began to take these discoveries seriously. They realized the North Sea was not just a body of water covering empty ground. It was hiding a drowned landscape. A place where humans had hunted, built camps, and raised families long before the first pyramids or written language. Doggerland existed during the Mesolithic period, roughly between 10,000 and 6,000 BCE. At that time, the last ice age was ending. Massive glaciers that once covered much of northern Europe were melting. Sea levels were rising, but slowly enough that people could adapt, at least for a while. This lost land stretched from what is now eastern England across to the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. It was not a narrow bridge, but a broad plain. Rivers ran through it. Hills rose gently above wetlands. Forests covered large areas filled with oak, pine, and birch. Animals roamed freely. Red deer, wild cattle, boar, and smaller game were common. For human groups living there, Doggerland was rich and forgiving. Archaeological evidence suggests these people were hunter-gatherers who followed seasonal patterns. They moved with animals, gathered plants, fished rivers, and lived close to the land. The stone tools found underwater show skill and planning. Flint blades, scrapers, and points were carefully shaped, not crude or rushed. What makes Doggerland especially important is its position. It sat at the center of ancient human movement. For early humans entering northern Europe, this land was not a barrier, it was a highway. People could walk from one region to another without ever seeing the sea. This challenges older ideas about how and when humans spread across Europe. The more researchers studied the finds, the clearer the picture became. Doggerland was not empty wilderness. It was occupied for thousands of years. People lived there long enough to understand its seasons, its dangers, and its rhythms. This was a submerged civilization, not in the sense of cities or stone buildings, but as a deeply rooted human world now hidden beneath the sea. Modern technology has helped bring this drowned landscape into focus. Oil and gas companies mapping the North Sea use seismic surveys to look beneath the seabed. When archaeologists gained access to this data, they saw something remarkable. The maps revealed ancient river channels, valleys, and coastlines preserved under layers of sediment. These were not guesses. They were clear outlines of a vanished land. One of the most important areas is the Dogger Bank, a shallow region in the central North Sea. Today it sits just below the surface, but during the Ice Age it was high ground. A place people could return to as water slowly crept inward. Many believe Dogger Bank may have been one of the last refuges of Doggerland, holding out as surrounding areas flooded. Climate change played the central role in Doggerland's disappearance. As ice melted worldwide, sea levels rose by tens of meters. At first, the change was gradual. Shorelines moved slowly. Wetlands expanded. Rivers widened. People likely adjusted, shifting camps and routes as needed. But over time, the land shrank. Then came sudden events. One of the most discussed is the Storegga Slide, a massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway around 6,200 BCE. It triggered a tsunami that swept across parts of Doggerland and into what is now eastern Britain. Evidence of this wave appears in sediment layers far inland. For people already living with rising water, this would have been devastating. Doggerland did not vanish in a single day. It broke apart. Islands formed. Low areas flooded. Routes disappeared. Eventually, what remained was cut off completely. Britain became an island not by choice but by the sea. What remains today lies beneath cold, murky water. Underwater archaeology in the North Sea is difficult. Strong currents, low visibility, and active shipping make exploration dangerous and expensive. As a result, much of Doggerland remains unmapped. What we know comes from fragments. A tool here, a bone there, a line on a seismic scan. And yet, even with limited access, Doggerland has already changed how history is told. It reminds us that ancient ocean discoveries are not always found in tropical waters or clear seas. Some of the most important lost underwater cities are not stone ruins but landscapes. Places where human life unfolded quietly and completely, then slipped beneath the waves. Life in Doggerland was shaped by movement, not by walls or permanent shelters. The people who lived there followed the land closely, paying attention to animals, water, and seasons. Everything we know about them comes from fragments, but those fragments speak clearly when placed together. Stone tools recovered from the North Sea tell much of the story. Many were made from flint, carefully chipped into blades, scrapers, and points. These were not random stones. The edges show repeated use, meaning they were carried, reused, and valued. Some tools match styles found on land in Britain and mainland Europe, which confirms that Doggerland was part of a wider human network, not an isolated zone. The tools suggest a flexible way of life. Scrapers were likely used to clean animal hides. Blades could cut meat or plants. Points may have been used on spears or arrows. This fits with what is known about Mesolithic hunter-gatherers elsewhere in Europe. They were highly skilled at surviving in changing environments, using lightweight tools that could travel with them. Animal remains provide more clues. Bones of red deer, wild cattle, boar, and elk have been found in fishing nets and dredged material. These animals thrived in mixed woodland and open grassland, which supports the idea that Doggerland had varied terrain. There is also evidence of fishing. Fish bones and harpoons found near ancient river channels suggest people relied heavily on freshwater and coastal resources. Food sources would have shifted throughout the year. In warmer months, people likely gathered berries, nuts, and edible plants. In colder seasons, hunting became more important. Rivers and wetlands offered fish and birds. This steady access to food is one reason Doggerland could support human life for thousands of years. There is no evidence of large villages or permanent buildings. Instead, archaeologists believe people lived in small groups, setting up temporary camps near rivers or forest edges. These camps would be reused over time, returning to familiar spots when conditions were right. This kind of movement allowed them to adapt as the land slowly changed. What makes Doggerland especially human is the sense that change was gradual enough to notice. Sea levels did not rise overnight. For generations, people would have watched shorelines creep closer. Forests thinning. Marshes expanding. Paths becoming wetter then impassable. The land was still home, but it was becoming less stable. This raises an important question. Did the people of Doggerland understand that their world was disappearing? There is no direct answer, but patterns suggest awareness. Camps appear to shift toward higher ground over time. The Dogger Bank area, once a hill above the plain, shows signs of repeated use. It may have served as a seasonal gathering place or a final refuge as surrounding land flooded. Eventually, travel routes would have broken apart. Rivers turned into bays. Lowlands became open water. Crossing between regions grew harder. What had once been a connected land slowly fractured into islands. For some groups, leaving may have been the only option. They could walk east toward mainland Europe or west toward Britain, following familiar terrain until water blocked the way. These migrations were not sudden escapes, but long adjustments. Families carrying tools, knowledge, and memories into new lands. This process challenges how we think about early human migration. Instead of dramatic journeys into unknown territory, Doggerland shows a quieter pattern. People did not discover Britain as much as they were gradually separated from it. The sea created borders where none had existed before. Underwater archaeology continues to add detail. Seismic maps show river systems that likely supported dense human activity. These rivers would have acted as natural highways, guiding movement and trade. Where rivers met, people may have exchanged materials or knowledge. Doggerland was not just a place to pass through. It was a center of life. One of the most striking aspects is how little has been explored directly. The North Sea is busy, cold, and dangerous. Diving is limited. Most discoveries happen by chance, when modern industry disturbs ancient ground. This means entire camps, tools, and even human remains may still lie untouched beneath layers of sediment. In recent years, researchers have begun calling for greater protection of the seafloor. As wind farms and pipelines expand, there is growing concern that vital evidence of submerged civilizations could be destroyed before being studied. Doggerland is now recognized as one of the most important deep-sea mystery landscapes in human history. What remains hardest to grasp is the emotional side. These were people watching familiar places vanish. Paths used by parents and grandparents lost to water. Hunting grounds gone. Rivers swallowed. The sea was not a distant force. It was an advancing presence. Doggerland forces us to question how many other human worlds have been erased without record. How much of our past now lies underwater, unseen and unnamed? It reminds us that history is not only written on land, but also buried beneath oceans. As Doggerland continued to shrink, the forces shaping its end became stronger and harder to ignore. What had once been a slow, manageable change began to speed up. The climate was warming, glaciers were retreating far to the north, and the oceans were rising faster than before. For the people still living on this land, the balance they had relied on for generations was starting to break. One of the most important turning points was the loss of freshwater systems. Rivers that once flowed gently across Doggerland began to widen as sea levels rose. Saltwater pushed inland, changing the chemistry of the soil and water. Plants that had fed both animals and humans struggled to survive. Wetlands expanded, but forests retreated. This shift would have reduced hunting grounds and made travel more difficult. Archaeological evidence suggests that human activity became more scattered during this period. Tools appear in smaller clusters. Camps seem less stable. This fits with the idea that people were no longer settling comfortably but passing through. Doggerland was turning from a home into a transition zone. Then came sudden disasters layered on top of slow change. Around 6200 BCE, a massive underwater landslide occurred off the coast of Norway. Known as the Storegga Slide, it displaced huge volumes of sediment into the ocean. This triggered a powerful tsunami that raced across the North Atlantic. When it reached Doggerland, much of the land was already low and vulnerable. Sediment studies along the coasts of eastern Britain and the North Sea show clear tsunami deposits from this event. Layers of marine sand appear far inland, mixed with shells and debris that could only have been carried by a strong wave. For people living on Doggerland, this was not just flooding. It was sudden, violent, and terrifying. We cannot know how many lives were lost, but the impact would have been enormous. Camps near rivers and coasts would have been destroyed. Animals would have been scattered or killed. Survivors may have fled inland, only to find less land available than before. The tsunami did not end Doggerland on its own, but it likely sped up its abandonment. After this event, the remaining land would have been fragmented into islands and marshy high ground. Travel between them required boats or dangerous crossings. This marks a key moment in human history. The sea was no longer just rising. It was dividing communities. Over time, even the last high points disappeared. The Dogger Bank, once a central refuge, became an island, then a shoal beneath the waves. By around 6000 BCE, the connection between Britain and mainland Europe was gone. The land bridge that had shaped human movement for thousands of years was fully submerged. What happened to the people who stayed too long is unknown. There are no written records, no direct stories passed down. But their absence is clear. After a certain point, human traces stop appearing in the submerged record. Doggerland was no longer livable. Today, the North Sea hides this entire process beneath layers of sand and water. Modern sonar and seismic imaging have allowed scientists to rebuild parts of the ancient landscape in detail. They can trace river valleys, hills, and coastlines with surprising clarity. In some areas, even ancient shorelines are visible, frozen in time beneath the seabed. These reconstructions have changed how archaeologists think about lost underwater cities and submerged civilizations. Doggerland shows that not all lost worlds were dramatic or advanced in architecture. Some were quiet, spread out, and deeply connected to nature. Their loss was not sudden collapse, but long erasure. There is also growing interest in how Doggerland may live on in human memory. Some researchers have suggested that ancient flood stories, passed down through generations, could be distant echoes of rising seas and sudden disasters like the Storega tsunami. While this idea cannot be proven, it highlights how powerful such events would have been for early communities. What is certain is that Doggerland forces us to rethink coastlines. The maps we rely on today are recent. For most of human existence, shorelines were different. Vast areas now underwater were once walked, hunted, and known. This means much of early human history is literally missing from the land-based record. As technology improves, underwater archaeology in the North Sea may finally reveal more. Carefully planned surveys, protected excavation zones, and cooperation with energy companies could uncover campsites, tools and context, and perhaps even human remains. Each discovery would add depth to a story we are only beginning to understand. Doggerland is not just a deep-sea mystery. It is a reminder that human worlds can vanish without ruins or monuments, that climate and water shape history as much as kings or wars, and that beneath today's oceans lie chapters of our past still waiting to be read. Doggerland has quietly changed the way archaeologists think about the past, even though most people have never heard its name. Before its discovery, early human history in northern Europe was studied almost entirely from dry land. Britain and mainland Europe were treated as separate regions, with migration explained through narrow land bridges or coastal travel. Doggerland showed that this picture was incomplete. Once researchers accepted that a vast landscape once existed beneath the North Sea, many older theories had to be revisited. Tools found in Britain that seemed sudden or unexplained now made sense when placed in a wider context. They were not isolated developments. They were part of a shared culture that had once moved freely across Doggerland. This realization also helped explain why certain animal species and plant types appeared in both regions at the same time. The land had allowed ecosystems to spread naturally. Humans followed the same routes, learning from the same environments, adapting together. Doggerland was not just a corridor. It was a center of life. Modern technology continues to push this understanding forward. High-resolution seismic data, originally collected for oil and gas exploration, has become one of the most valuable tools in underwater archaeology. These scans allow scientists to see beneath the seabed without disturbing it. River bends, lake basins, and even ancient shorelines can be identified with precision. In some mapped areas, researchers can tell where people were most likely to live. Elevated ground near freshwater sources stands out clearly. These spots are now considered high-priority zones for future exploration. The challenge is reaching them. The North Sea is one of the most difficult places in the world to work underwater. Visibility is low. Currents are strong. The seabed shifts constantly. Unlike clear tropical waters where ruins can be seen easily, Doggerland is buried under thick layers of sediment. Excavation requires careful planning, expensive equipment, and long-term funding. As a result, progress is slow. There is also a race against time. Modern development in the North Sea is increasing. Wind farms, pipelines, and cables are being installed at a rapid pace. While regulations require archaeological surveys before construction, many discoveries are made only moments before the ground is disturbed. Some evidence may already be lost. This has led to calls for greater protection of submerged landscapes, not just individual objects. Doggerland is now seen as a cultural heritage site, even though it lies underwater and has no visible ruins. Preserving it means recognizing that human history does not stop at the shoreline. Doggerland also carries a message that feels especially relevant today. Its disappearance was driven by climate change. Rising temperatures, melting ice, and rising seas reshaped the world completely. For the people living there, adaptation had limits. Eventually, the land they depended on was gone. This does not make Doggerland a warning in a dramatic sense, but it does make it a reminder. Human societies have always been shaped by their environment. When that environment changes faster than people can adapt, even long-established ways of life can disappear. What makes Doggerland unique among lost underwater cities is its scale. It was not a single settlement or region. It was an entire world, erased so thoroughly that it took thousands of years to even realize it had existed. No ruins stood above water. No stories were written down. Only scattered tools and bones remained. And yet, those fragments were enough. Today, Doggerland stands as one of the most important ancient ocean discoveries ever identified. It connects archaeology, geology, climate science, and human history into a single story. A story still being written, piece by piece, from beneath the sea. As research continues, Doggerland may reveal more about how early humans lived with change, moved across landscapes, and responded to loss. It reminds us that much of our shared past lies underwater, waiting patiently, shaped by time but not erased by it.